Joe Douglas, I understand what the record says he is. This is a guy that has drafted Breece Hall, and he's fired. I mean, you have 7 really good NFL starters there. There's a lot more going on that is negatively impacting the on-field performance.
I apologize. I really understand if fans of other football teams, apart from the New York Jets or the Dallas Cowboys or the Chicago Bears or the New York Giants, would like to see other content being made. But alas, right when I think that there's other things we could turn our attention to, the New York Jets do something else that obviously is video worthy. As the Aaron Rodgers situation has gotten so bad that literally anyone that has touched this situation is out of a job. So before we get to the content, we are on the grind to 1 million subscribers. Make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Now that we get all that out of the way, so Stephon Diggs is out for the season, and the Houston Texans were without Nico Collins on Sunday Night Football when they faced off against the Detroit Lions, which meant that Tank Dell was going to see more targets. The problem? I had no idea who the Texans wide receiver 2 was going to be, which made it very difficult to project receiving yards at the very beginning of the game. Now, as Sunday Night Football started, we saw John Mechie explode for over 65 receiving yards in the beginning, so at halftime, I decided to take advantage of this. I went on Prize Picks to check his live projection and saw that he only needed 6 more receiving yards in the second half for his square to hit. And based off of the flow of the game, you didn't need to be a genius to know this was going to work. So I also saw that David Montgomery only needed 15 more rush yards in the second half for his square to hit. So I decided to test the waters with my first live pick and made an easy $60. Now, if you want to take advantage of this brand new feature, make sure you download Prize Picks and use my promo code Mikerophone to get a free $50 when you make a play of $5 or more. And if you followed me on Instagram, you would have seen this projection on my story. But since it's a live projection, I highly recommend turning on my story notification so you get them immediately. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? I really hate to see what's happening to the New York Jets. I understand it's really easy to point the finger at the Jets and laugh, especially because Aaron Rodgers is on that team, but I really don't like seeing teams that make very intelligent decisions and build their roster properly get punished the way that the Jets have, especially when you consider all the individuals that have lost their jobs or have had their careers forever altered as a result of this. Take Zach Wilson, for instance. He was supposed to have a redshirt year last year. He was excited that his favorite football player of all time and his mentor was going to be on the same team as him. But then, just a few snaps into his career, Aaron Rodgers would tear his Achilles, and Zach Wilson was thrusted into the same position once again. And it's not like he had an all-world offensive staff that was able to develop him. Even though Zach Wilson showed flashes periodically, like against the Kansas City Chiefs last year, no coach was really able to harness that potential. Nathaniel Hackett was his offensive coordinator. What did you expect? You thought Nathaniel Hackett was going to be able to develop Zach Wilson? Nathaniel Hackett literally ruined another Wilson's career. If it wasn't for Mike Tomlin, Russell Wilson would probably be doing Subway commercials right now full time.
Hey, you want to split this Subway sandwich?
No. Well, that's just one example. Another person that was clearly affected by all this was Robert Saleh. I know a lot of Jets fans would say Robert Saleh has had a horrific record with the New York Jets, and that's a very valid point to make. But Robert Saleh was brought in to build one of the best defenses in the NFL, and he did just that. He took a defense that featured Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen Williams, Michael Carter II, Sauce Gardner, and turned it into one of the most imposing defenses in the NFL. The offense was supposed to be ran by Aaron Rodgers and his buddies. You know, Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett, and Todd Downing. And when they weren't able to get the job done, he was fired after a 2-3 start to the season. And the reason the firing was so shocking was the New York Jets didn't really have a great interim head coach to replace him. Nothing against Jeff Ulbrich, but if you had to choose between Robert Saleh and the defensive coordinator, you might as well opt for continuity at this point, especially because there were so many new pieces with the New York Jets. I mean, you have to give Joe Douglas credit. In the offseason, he pretty much addressed each and every every single possible need that the Jets would have. He traded for Morgan Moses, who was 33 years old, but was still a very solid tackle from the Baltimore Ravens. He signed John Simpson to a 2-year deal worth $18 million. Sure, it was a little bit of an overpay, but still, he was cheaper than Lake and Tomlinson, and they were hoping that Simpson would be able to develop into a better guard. And so far, he has. John Simpson is one of the best guards in the NFL. He has a Pro Football Focus grade of 80.7. In 2023, he was a 56.5. In 2023, he was the second most penalized guard in the NFL, but this year he's the 19th most penalized guard in the NFL. But Joe Douglas wasn't done there. He drafted a developmental tackle in Ali Fashanu out of Penn State, a player that was at one point considered to go in the top 5 of the NFL draft, and he decided to cut ties with Zach Taylor, opting for a much more secure backup quarterback in the event that Aaron Rodgers did go down with injury, signing Tyrod Taylor to a 2-year contract. He signed Javon Kinlaw to a prove-it deal, which isn't really going that great so far, and he also signed Isaiah Oliver to a prove-it deal, who is having a very solid season for the New York Jets as well. And that's before we get to the inadvertent, unintentional trade Bryce Huff signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Jets would then trade for Hassan Reddick. And there was some ugliness in the beginning of the season as a result of a holdout, but even without Hassan Reddick, the New York Jets were one of the best defenses in the NFL. But they weren't done there. They signed Tyron Smith to a 1-year, $20 million incentive-laden deal before bringing on Mike Williams on a 1-year, $15 million contract. If you took a look at this team, there's a lot of new pieces, but it addressed a lot of the needs that the New York Jets had. And I think this all leads us to one question. What makes a good general manager and a bad general manager? Because there are times where teams could actually be very successful with terrible general managers, like the Dallas Cowboys over the past 2 years before this year. They did a horrible job constructing Dak Prescott's deal. They backloaded his contract, and despite that, they were still one of the best teams in the NFC last year. But then there's moments where a team is constructed remarkably by a brilliant general manager, but since they're not performing, and since they need someone to point the blame finger on, that general manager would get fired. And it seems like that's the case for the New York Jets. And this is really infuriating for me because this team was perfectly built, in my opinion. The philosophy made a lot of sense. Have Robert Saleh handle the defense, and have Aaron Rodgers and company bring some of his buddies over from Green Bay and handle the offense. But the thing is, I really don't think Aaron Rodgers held up his part of the deal. I mean, when you bring in Mike Williams, a bunch of new offensive linemen, and then on top of that, you're missing mandatory minicamp, which is very crucial to build up team chemistry with your new teammates, then obviously your team isn't going to perform well. And it's really funny because Aaron Rodgers will consistently say things like this.
It's interesting the amount of power that people think that I have, which I don't.
But if you just take a look at how this season's gone on, it's been a lot of pointing the blame finger at others and no one pointing the blame finger at themselves. And I've given examples in a lot of our content so far, like when the New York Jets lost to the Buffalo Bills 23-20. They had a chance to win that game on October 14th. Aaron Rodgers had a miscommunication with Mike Williams, and at the end, he said this.
Two verticals, Allen's down the seam, Mike's down the red line. So I'm looking at Allen, he puts his hand up, 3 guys go with him, so I'm throwing a no look to the red line. And when I just peek my eyes back there, he's running a handbreaker. It's got to be down the red line.
Were you throwing that like to come back to it?
No, I was throwing it to the red line, but when I got to about here, I realized he was running handbreaker, so I had to kind of adjust it a little bit. But the play is 2 guys vertical, 1 guy down the seam, 1 guy on the red line.
Following that, the Jets decided to trade for Devontae Adams, which wasn't necessary. Mike Williams could have easily filled the role that the New York Jets needed, especially with Garrett Wilson being the undisputed #1 wide receiver. But even once that happened, all we really got was another person to stroke Aaron Rodgers' ego.
Possible because it's tough. I mean, it's hard as, if Michael Jordan was on this team, he wouldn't be happy. So, you can look at it however you want with that. But, yeah, you're not supposed to be happy when things aren't going great, but you do have to try to dig deep and find a way to fix it, and that's what we're trying to do now.
So at the end of the day, the New York Jets have one of the best wide receiver cores in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers' guy was hired offensively, Todd Downing and Nathaniel Hackett. When coaching didn't work out, they fired Robert Saleh, and at the same time, they decided to elevate Todd Downing. Currently, the New York Jets have been 1-5 since firing Robert Saleh, and they're not done pointing the blame finger at others, ladies and gentlemen, because we just found out that they're also firing their general manager, Joe Douglas. And the timing timing of this is just hilarious, but it also is an indication that something way more sinister is happening, because on Halloween night, we found out this.
Albert, what's the mood inside this organization?
Tenuous time in the Jets building for sure, and for people who work there now, right back to the top. Now, owner Woody Johnson badly wants to win. He's sunk resources, but he's also created an environment that the people there don't feel like is all that conducive. That's because he listens to too many non-football people on Football Matters, and that's led to what people there feel like is an unpredictable boss, and they're walking around on eggshells. These are things that Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas were warned about before they went there. There is seismic change after this year, which a lot of people around the league expect. It could affect who's willing to go there in 2025.
Now, you guys know on this YouTube channel, I do like messing around and creating memes of particular things. I like to keep things relatively light, but informative. For example, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't show you this. Joe Montana joins the Chiefs and they go to the AFC title game. As a matter of fact, he could have been possibly one of the greatest Chiefs quarterbacks of all time if he didn't get hurt at the wrong time. And we made a separate video on that if you guys want to check it out. And we'll even leave it in the end screen because it was a video we did a while ago. Peyton Manning joins the Denver Broncos. They go to 2 Super Bowls and win 1. Tom Brady joins the Bucks and they win a Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers joins the Jets, gets the coach and GM fired mid-season. And a lot of people feel a certain way about this. It seems like fans are doing their absolute best to dig low points in Joe Douglas's career. Like, for instance, Douglas was very excited when the Colts took A.D. Mitchell over Malachi Corley.
Indianapolis has submitted his pick. Washington
Which so far Malachi Corley hasn't been the greatest, and there's footage of him trying to trade up desperately for Malachi Corley.
We're going to do it fast. It'll be 17 and 1
I'm calling a player Malachi Corley.
I mean, I like blaming Aaron Rodgers as much as the next guy. I like holding coaches accountable as much as the next guy, but you don't have to be a genius to figure out who the problem here truly is. I mean, look at this report from Connor Hughes. The Jets players checked out and are ready for the season to end amid firings. With their playoff hopes likely shot, some members of the team are reportedly checked out, according to Connor Hughes. The result, the offense didn't improve, the defense regressed, and the Jets continued to lose. Now you have a team sources described to SNY as checked out. Players aren't angry or annoyed at their 3-8 record. They're, as one person described, just ready for it to be over. The Jets started the season 2-1, but lost 5 straight before finally picking up their 3rd win of the year against the Texans. And that win seemed to have sparked new life in New York as the Jets offense started clicking. But a 31-6 blowout loss to the Cardinals the following week showed no signs of things turning around, and they lost their latest matchup against the Indianapolis Colts 28-27. They made a change by firing Robert Saleh after a 2-3 start, but it became evident soon after that Saleh was far from the only problem for the Jets. So they decided to fire Joe Douglas, and now their players don't even care anymore. The craziest part about this is, amid the changes to the coaching staff and the front office, changes on the field could be coming as well. Hughes noted that New York prefers to move on from Aaron Rodgers, which would mark the end of a failed experiment, and the Jets would essentially start their rebuild over. Man, this is... wow. I mean, I don't even know where to begin about this. And this isn't the only time I'm hearing this report. According to Rich Cimini, with a totally new regime in 2025, it likely means that Aaron Rodgers won't be back. A new general manager and new head coach will probably want their own QB. Rodgers had a good relationship with Joe Douglas, and last week he advocated for Jeff Ulbrich. And it's hard to imagine him wanting to even be back. #Jets. Whenever you hear things like this, you can point the blame finger at one particular guy. It's your head coach's fault. It's your general manager's fault. It's your starting QB's fault. The team around your starting QB stinks. I mean, eventually it all traces back to one individual at the very, very top. And that is clearly ownership. I mean, look, Aaron Rodgers has not been playing well this season, and he is not off the hook either. I don't think he put enough effort into building the proper team chemistry needed to harness the potential of this incredibly talented team. And I'll say it over and over again, guys. I mean, this
team was supposed to be a Super Bowl contender. I mean, they should have been a Super Bowl contender. They didn't put the work in to be a Super Bowl contender, and they opted for cheap, quick fixes along the way, as opposed to actually trying to build something. If you wanted to make it work with Aaron Rodgers, you should have done what Brian Gutekunst did and put your foot down when it makes sense. It's really interesting because we're getting additional reports that pertain to Joe Douglas, and it seems like Joe Douglas's camp is trying to clear his name. And it's really fascinating here. And this is the whole reason why it took so long to make this video. But according to Athlon Sports, things were so bad that Joe Douglas was effectively stripped of most of his power weeks ago, and his firing on Tuesday was simply a formality, according to Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports. While Joe Douglas held the GM title until today, I'm told that much of the organization had been overseen by higher ups over the past month. This was apparent in moves like the Davante Adams trade, which many rival executives considered an overpay, and the Hassan Reddick renegotiation, which had stalled before being directly handled by others. Douglas effectively lost most of his authority after the firing of Robert Saleh, a decision made with minimal input from Douglas by owner Woody Johnson in October. It goes on to say that despite drafting several key pieces of the Jets' young nucleus like Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Will McDonald, Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson, and Quinnen Williams, the team didn't produce during Douglas's tenure. You can tell this was written by someone in Douglas's camp because he's taking credit for the Quinnen Williams drafting, and he's saying Will McDonald is good. He's not. Respectfully, he's not a good edge rusher. Respectfully. So he could become one, but so far, he's not a star edge rusher. As a matter of fact, he might be trending more towards the other direction. I mean, he could develop in the future, and he may have been able to develop had Robert Saleh stayed, but you can get an idea of where this is heading. I mean, Woody Johnson has absolutely no patience with this team. According to The Athletic, Woody Johnson suggested that the team bench QB Aaron Rodgers after the team's loss to the Broncos in week 4 because he thought Rodgers wasn't playing well enough, per The Athletic. Coaches pushed back on this. Now, I understand in hindsight, yeah, this would have been a great decision, I guess. Putting in Tyrod Taylor over Aaron Rodgers would have made for great content for me. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded it. But if you just take a step back and look at this from a football perspective, this is a guy that you waited a whole season to recover from a torn Achilles. This is a guy that you really went all in on this offseason. And after 4 weeks of him playing poorly, you wanted to bench him. I mean, the Jets were 2-2 at that point. You wanted to bench him already? And then you fired your coach 5 games into the season, and then you fire the general manager that did an incredible job drafting these players and putting you in quite possibly the best situation this team has ever been since the Mark Sanchez, Rex Ryan era. I mean, what are we doing here? Really, how do you improve from here? Well, for Aaron Rodgers, fans want one scenario and one scenario only. And buckle down, it's a fairly ridiculous scenario. They want Aaron Rodgers to the Minnesota Vikings, and the reason is just because it's the prophecy. They demand it. Brett Favre went to the New York Jets, played great for 8 weeks, got injured, and then eventually retired and signed with the Minnesota Vikings. Now you might be thinking, but Mike, the Minnesota Vikings have Sam Darnold. But Sam Darnold's going to be a free agent after this season, so the part of you might be thinking, but Mike, the Minnesota Vikings drafted J.J. McCarthy last year, and he was supposed to be out for only 1 season. Well, J.J. McCarthy recently got a second surgery on his knee, and the Minnesota Vikings are clearly a Super Bowl caliber team, and the only basis for Rodgers to the Vikings that I'm producing is just because of the prophecy. Do I think there might be more teams out there that make sense? Yes, but I will say the one thing that I think is going to be very entertaining is Aaron Rodgers went from being a player that is on top of the world, that was literally handing the New York Jets a laundry list of players that he wanted to play with the offseason that he got traded to the Jets, to a player that is about to enter his Russell Wilson to the Steelers era, meaning you might not see Aaron Rodgers potentially break the bank to sign with the team. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he retired altogether. For the record, I think Aaron Rodgers definitely deserves a large portion of the blame for the failure of this franchise. This offense could have been so dominant when you just take a step back and look at who plays on this damn team. I mean, again, Breece Hall, who is one of the best running backs in the entire NFL, Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, a much improved offensive line. Breece Hall's in the midst of one of his worst seasons, but he's still averaging 4.2 yards per carry. I think at the end of the day, a person that gets all the blame for this is Woody Johnson. He didn't even give this team a chance. I mean, yes, Aaron Rodgers should have made it to minicamp. Yes, Joe Douglas shouldn't have drafted Zach Wilson, and he probably should have hired his own homegrown offensive coordinator, as opposed to some Aaron Rodgers yes men. But 5 games into the season and you're already punting on your team? If you guys remember, 2 games into the season, we were thinking that the Saints were Super Bowl contenders. And I think the Jets could have potentially turned it around and at least would have had a much better record had they have continued forward with Robert Saleh. I wonder what their plan is for the foreseeable future. I mean, currently the Jets are projected to get the 8th overall pick. Do I think this is a team that is going to be targeting a quarterback with that pick? I mean, they're kind of out of the range at that point. And outside of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, I don't think there's any major game changers at the quarterback position. I mean, yeah, draft a QB with your 2nd round pick if you want, but I just think the Jets need to stop looking for quick fixes to this roster and try to let this team develop some chemistry. The pieces are there. You can tell players are really fed up with what's going on, and elevating the interim general manager Jeff Ulbrich was not the right move potentially, because he tried to do this thing where he showed his defensive players how to tackle, and this is how Sauce Gardner took it.
We've been doing it. Simple. We really don't need no presentation. You know, I know where he was coming from when he did it, but us as professional athletes, we got to be able to make tackles, me included for sure.
So according to Adam Schefter, more change in New York. The Jets have now fired GM Joe Douglas. Sources tell ESPN. Last month was head coach Robert Saleh. Now it's Douglas. So we're going to dive into Joe Douglas's major decisions and try to analyze this. But under Joe Douglas, the Jets have had some notable draft successes, including landing Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, and Breece Hall in the same draft. However, they never solved the quarterback position. And with a 3-8 record in the 2024 season, the organization has decided to move in a different direction. Now, according to Ian Rappaport, the reason why this went down was Joe Douglas was considered unlikely to return to the Jets for 2025. So it was a matter of when, not if, Woody Johnson chose now. At 3-8 with a team Johnson said is one of the most talented ever, it's a full overhaul. And according to Diana Rossini, the reason why they did this was the Jets wanted a new general manager, pretty much. They didn't want to start finding a new general manager with Joe Douglas in as the existing general manager. So let's break all of this down. So the Jets also put out a statement saying, "Today I informed Joe Douglas he will no longer serve as the general manager of the New York Jets. I wanted to thank Joe for his commitment to the Jets over the last 6 years and wish him and his family the best moving forward. Phil Savage will be the interim general manager for the remainder of the season. We will begin the process to identify a new GM immediately." So if you take a look at Joe Douglas's draft history, in the beginning it was a mixed bag, to be honest. Like, his first draft for the New York Jets was terrible. It was the 2020 NFL draft. The 2019 NFL draft wasn't under Joe Douglas, but this was the Mekhi Becton, Denzel Mims draft. He had 2 third-round picks, and honestly, there wasn't anyone that was of notable significance in 2020. In 2021, he had one of his most ambitious drafts to date, and once again, it was pretty bad. If you guys remember, this was the draft that they decided to select Zach Wilson in. Now, they did hit on their second first-round pick, Elijah Vera Tucker, but this was the first draft I covered in my career covering NFL content, and I remember just begging and pleading with the New York Jets just to select Penei Sewell. I mean, you might as well ride out Sam Darnold's rookie scale contract. No quarterback was able to succeed under the circumstances that Sam Darnold was in with Adam Gase as his head coach, but alas, that's not what they ended up doing. They selected Zach Wilson with the number 2 overall pick. I mean, anyone else that wasn't a quarterback would have done well here. I mean, you could have selected Kyle Pitts and I would have said this was a great move. Jamar Chase came after, Penei Sewell, Patrick Surtain, I mean, Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater. Honestly, it really did not matter. They just didn't need a quarterback, and I think that's the number one thing that a lot of these teams do that screw them over in the future. They just get really horny for a quarterback and they select him way too early, and the result is they ruin that quarterback's career. Now, Elijah Moore was a solid pick in the 2nd round, but he didn't really do that much for the New York Jets, and he currently plays for the Browns, where he doesn't really do too much there either. Michael Carter was a great pick in the 4th round. Michael Carter the 2nd was a steal in the 5th round. And then we get to 2022, which is essentially Joe Douglas's magnum opus. I mean, this is the draft where he selected Sauce Gardner, then Garrett Wilson in the 1st round. Both of these players won Rookie of the Year. He then trades back into the 1st round once again, selects Jermaine Johnson the 2nd, and that's before he selects Breece Hall in the 2nd round. I mean, his first 4 picks in the 2022 NFL draft, which by the way was considered to be a relatively weak draft so far, but all these players were studs. In 2023, he kind of of got hoed a little bit because of the Aaron Rodgers trade. A huge stipulation of the Aaron Rodgers trade was the New York Jets were going to trade their first round pick for the Green Bay Packers first round pick, which means that the Packers get to move up like 2 picks ahead of the New York Jets. Result of this, well, the New York Jets lost out on Broderick Jones, which is someone that they were really targeting, and they selected Will McDonald. And so far, Will McDonald has been terrible. This past year, they took a project offensive lineman in Ali Fashanu and also selected Braylon Allen. But the thing I really liked about Joe Douglas is whenever there was a problem, he addressed it, and he wasn't really trigger happy about it unless if it came from ownership. And I don't think the Jets' downfall is his fault because he's not making poor decisions here. You need a quarterback and you have a team that's ready to win now. You trade for Aaron Rodgers. What are you basing this off of? Well, it worked for Tom Brady a few years ago, and it's not like you overpaid for Aaron Rodgers either. You need a backup QB, you get Tyrod Taylor. You need an offensive line, well, you go all in and you bring in 3 new offensive linemen and a project offensive lineman that you could develop for the future. You go all in on that. You need wide receiver depth. Well, you get some people that Aaron Rodgers is familiar with, like Alan Lazard, for instance, and you pair that with a boom or bust type wide receiver like Mike Williams. And when all this doesn't work out, you can't sit back and say,
well, his plan didn't work, we need to fire him.
Because at the end of the day, it was a good plan. The only 2 mistakes that Joe Douglas made that you could hold over him was selecting Zach Wilson number 2 overall. And I guess depending on who you ask, you could also say firing Robert Saleh was another mistake. And I don't think it was that big of a mistake. But at the end of the day, I think he did a great job as a general manager. And I hope he gets another opportunity in the future because I just think this is the New York Jets once again scapegoating another person that really didn't deserve it. I would have loved to have a general manager like Joe Douglas who I could get behind, at least in terms of the moves that he made. I mean, my favorite team, the Dallas Cowboys, currently just signed Dak Prescott to the highest paid contract in the NFL, and then also signed CeeDee Lamb to the 2nd highest paid contract in the NFL. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but I would have liked to see that contract in like March or maybe April, so we wouldn't have to pay him as much, maybe save some dollars here and there so we could have got Derrick Henry. Or like you take a look at a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trent Baalke has been there for way too freaking long, and I really believe that this man is quite literally destroying Trevor Lawrence's career. And we made a separate video on that, and I'll try to leave it in the end screen. If I didn't do that, remind me in the comment section, I'll make sure I do it. But Trent Baalke has done a horrible job building a team around Trevor Lawrence. I don't think the hiring of Urban Meyer was his decision, but selecting Travis Etienne in the same draft when you had James Robinson never made a lot of sense to me. Not getting Trevor Lawrence that bona fide wide receiver 1, that DeAndre Hopkins caliber of wide receiver, or Stephon Diggs or AJ Brown caliber of wide receiver. It's just, there are really bad general managers there that really make things harder for their players, and they still have a job. And honestly, I think Joe Douglas is not the worst general manager in the NFL. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say that he's in the top 10 in terms of general managers. So it sucks to see this happen. I'm sorry if you're a Jets fan. You might disagree with me if you're a Jets fan, and if you do, let me know in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.